school self-evaluation and data alternatives, which will be presented by Dr. Sonia Ben-Jumper from the Edu-Eval Educational Council.
Good morning. Everybody all excited to be here? Okay, so as she said, my name is Dr. Sonia Ben-Jumper. I'm with Edu-Eval Educational Consultancy. Just to tell you a little bit about my background and why I'm interested in evaluations, what I've been doing for the last 20 years or so is conducting development evaluations. So I do a lot of, in the education sector specifically, so a lot of assessment and evaluation. So when I use terminology, I'm using the technical terms at all times. And at this point, you should have already gotten a survey that you have completed, correct? Yeah. Everybody got it? Yeah? Good. So once you've completed it, turn it over, put your name on it, and then create a pile on your desk, on your table. So you'll be able to retrieve your own survey later on as part of our activities. Is that better? I need the mic on. You'll be able to get your own survey later on, and that is only for you to look at. Okay? So at this point, I think everybody in the room has seen this document, correct?
Yes.
Yeah? How many of you have not seen this document? Okay. So this is the inspection handbook for Dubai. KHDA is one of the authorities that tries to encourage and monitor quality of schools, and one of the ways they do that is through the inspections. And this is the inspection handbook, and very specifically I pulled out a quote that has to do with self-evaluation, which is one of the pieces that they look at. And it's also a piece that from our data shows is a struggle for a lot of schools, even good schools. This is where they struggle. So that's why this series of Selfies, or self-evaluation for schools, has been created that is going to be done throughout the entire WhatWorks workshops this year. And so accurate self-evaluation is a precondition for school improvement. How many of you would agree with that statement? How many of you are kind of neutral about that? How many of you disagree? And maybe wouldn't admit it.
Can you repeat once again?
Accurate self-evaluation is a precondition for school improvement. So what that means is, if we want to know how to improve, we first need to know where the gaps are and where the pockets of excellence are. And that's what self-evaluation is. It's really just looking at ourselves against standardized outcomes and targets to be able to say, okay, this is where we want to be, this is where we're supposed to be, this is where we are. Let's take a look at that gap, and that is the improvement gap. And what often happens when you don't have accurate self-evaluation is you're kind of shooting in the dark. Vendors come to you and say, hey, I have this really great new ICT, web-based, cloud-based, phonetic-based math curriculum for you, and it's amazing, and everything's great, and you're like, great, everything's going to improve, but what if all those things are okay in your school already? What if what you really need is some better extracurricular activities, or some better health and safety measures, right? This actually points out where the gaps are, and that's why it's so critical for sustained school improvement. So what a school self-evaluation is a realistic view of a school's strengths and its weaknesses and what it should do. And if it doesn't do this for you, then you don't have it right yet. It should inform purposeful actions for improvement. Remember, repeat that, purposeful actions for improvement, not just actions for improvement. What happens in some schools is what we do is we fall into activity cycles. We're going to do an activity. We're going to do an activity to improve. But first, you need to figure out what you're improving and then how you're going to improve it in a purposeful manner. And what we do in self-evaluation is we first focus on outcomes. Remember I said I would use always the technical term of outcomes? When I talk about outcomes, I talk about those linked and mapped to a logical framework, those that are mapped to indicators, those with smart targets, so that I know exactly what I'm measuring. They have to be measurable. And at that point, I can then move on to actually making effective school changes that will enhance student success, because that's my ultimate goal. And that will give you an effective school. Okay? And that's why this is such a critical component. And that's why it's actually looked at in all accreditation now. Okay? Now, for those of you who know the inspections, you'll recognize these 3 questions. Sarah, we can start handing out these. These 7 questions. These are the self-evaluation questions from the DSIB inspection handbook. How good are students' attainments, progress, and learning skills? How good is the student's personal and social development, teaching and assessment? Does the curriculum meet the educational needs of all students? How well does the school protect and support students? Especially for this room, you'll be concerned about how good are the leadership and management of the school, and how well does the school perform overall. And within each of these is a set of indicators to look at. And so we're going to do a little bit of a mind warm-up exercise, but we're going to specifically look at these 3. How good are student attainment, progress, and learning skills? That's the one that most people focus on, because how do you figure that out very quickly? If you want to know how students are doing, how students are performing, what do you look at? But what kind of data? Exam results? Marks, grades, exactly. And this is where a lot of people spend a lot of their time. But as you can see, it's actually more in-depth than that for school-based. How good is students' personal and social development, and how good are the leadership and management of the schools? So if you look at the very first page of your handout that Sarah is giving you right now, you'll see the very first exercise that we're going to do. And what I have done is I have picked, for each of those questions, 1, 2, and 6, one of the key aspects in the inspection handbook. And I've listed out the aspects. So if you look at number 1, how good are the students' attainment, progress, and learning skills? I picked learning skills. I didn't pick achievement. Engagement in and responsibility for their own learning, students' interactions, collaboration, and so on and so forth. It's in your handout. In your groups right now, what I'd like you to do is decide which one you're going to pick. Questions 1, 2, or 6. Once you've done that, read the key aspects, and then start writing what kind of data specifically would give you evidence for that particular key aspect in your school, or in any school. Okay, you'll have 5 minutes to do this.
Would you choose what? It's like 1.
So which number are you picking?
From this. Repeat the first one. First one, because mostly I teach.
Number 1? Okay. And how will we know if students are engaged? Well, you want to know what is the back. I want to know what is the data sources. What you think is a data source that will show evidence.
Presentation for the
I just want to know what data source was present.
Yeah.
I heard marketing.
Under what?
So you got marketing materials. What else?
Okay, that's next and then come back again.
So I just wanted to gauge your sense of data sources. And it does seem that there's some intuition about it, and that many people in the room have done something about this. But these are just some of them. And one of the questions that came up that I thought was a really good one is, does this have to be quantitative? Right? Because that's what people generally go to, the quantitative. And the answer is no, absolutely not. Evidence is evidence. Quantitative data can be as unreliable and invalid as qualitative data. Right? The trick is to make sure that when you collect your data, whether it be quantitative or qualitative, that you make sure that it's valid and reliable, so that you understand your source, you understand how you're collecting it, and the quality of the data. Do we have a question? No? Okay. Do we have any questions on this? Yes?
I think what's interesting for me is that all those use of our data sources is about identifying the most pertinent source of data to match with the particular area that you're scrutinising. So for example, vision and direction in terms of 6.1, effectiveness of leadership. In one sense, all of those could give us some indication of vision and direction, but it's about deciding how effectively to draw on data sources, I think.
Yeah, and I think that's a really valid point, because you don't want to use a staff survey for absolutely every single one of these. What you want to do is look at what we call key indicators and key data sources. What is the best representation? You're not doing in-depth research. You're doing an evaluation. And if you think of the term evaluation, it's really a snapshot. It's supposed to be informative. It's applied research. Right? So if you think of it as applied research, suddenly you're thinking, okay, key indicators, what are the key pieces of information that I can use to purposefully make decisions that are reflective of what I need to do? And it doesn't have to be very, very in-depth all the time. But you need to have sufficient information that's reliable and valid. And you need to know why you're using different data. What tends to happen when schools start to use this is that they get data happy and they just want to collect data as much as they can because they realize that they can. And my advice always is stop, ask your questions, figure out what you want to know, and then start collecting data. Right? Because what tends to happen when schools do that, and this is usually when I get called in, is they're drowning in data. And not all of it is good, and not all of it is relevant. So you want to know what to do. Okay, fun exercise, we're all warmed up. We have a question here, then here. Yeah.
My question is, how can we differentiate between attainment and progress?
Okay, that's a very specific question. I'll get back to you on a one-to-one.
Okay, now ours is a new school, and we have taken students across the grades, say up to 6.
Okay.
They are all coming from different backgrounds with different levels of fundamentals.
Yes.
Now, when I talk about attainment, in the self-evaluation, I'm supposed to rate myself as regards pre-primary, primary, etc. Now, when they are coming from different backgrounds and different fundamental levels, even if I take an average, when I take outstanding or good, what does it indicate? Is there a grading pattern for that? Or what do I call, because my class average, if I take all of them together, maybe around 65 to 70%. Then what do I call it?
I think you're looking for a standardized instrument when you've got kids coming from all over, because you want to understand what they are across the same instrument.
Yes.
And 2, I don't really like the attachment to labels of good or outstanding or acceptable, because when you're talking about kids and achievement, you're looking at a continuum of learning.
Yes, yes.
And that's what you want to map it to.
Yes.
So I think it's about mapping to your curriculum and your standards specifically. But we can talk more about that in your particular case.
Okay.
Okay?
Okay.
All right. So now that our brains are warmed up, we're thinking data. I want to just go through, because we did talk about what kind of data we could use, just some of the categories of data that we have. So we have demographic data and student achievement data, which everybody seems to really, really latch on to and like, especially since we can categorize it and quantify it. So demographic data are things like gender, race and ethnicity, English language proficiency status, Arabic language proficiency status, native, non-native. School demographic data would be things like enrollment numbers of students, attendance, absences, tardiness, and then student behavior in terms of suspensions, expulsions, dropout rates, grad rates, progression across grades by cohort. Those are all demographic. Okay, and why do we like demographic data? I'll get into that in a second. It's not just for marketing. There's actually a different reason for it. So when we talk about student achievement, we've been talking about a few different kinds of tests. There are norm reference achievement tests. Then there is national assessments, or state standard-based criteria of assessments. And it's important to know what you're using. And depending on your curriculum and your accreditation status, you might be using GCSE, you might be using the IB, you might be using a lot of different kinds of tests depending. You need to understand of those tests, if you're going to use them, are these norm referenced? If they are they norm referenced to country of origin? Are they norm referenced here? What's going on with the norm referencing? And if they're not, and they're just criterion based, you need to understand the standards. So it's really important to understand all those things as you adopt other people's tests for your schools. Then there's classroom assessments, including student work, which was actually on one of the tables. And what you want to understand for classroom assessment, especially when you're looking across classrooms, is what is the reliability of those classroom assessments? Are the teachers working completely independently, or are they working together to be able to map items to the curriculum and the standards? Right? Now, what people usually do is they don't look at the leadership level, they don't look at student achievement alone, and they don't look at demographics alone, because really that's not very interesting. It really doesn't matter if you have 51% or 61% female students. But what people are interested in is, let me look at my standardized testing results for mathematics, and I would like to know if the girls are doing better than the boys, or the boys are doing better than the girls. I want to know if the kids with English language proficiency that's reduced are doing as well or not as well on mathematics achievement, because that will tell me if this is a group that needs more attention and what kind of attention I need to bring to it. The other kinds of data, there are a lot of kinds, I'm only going to go through a few, is program data. Goals, objectives, requirements of program implementation. This is always the leadership and head teacher's domain. Student selection criteria, that's very important. Program participants, student staff, etc. So those are for the overall programs. And then we have perception data. And perception data is often overlooked. And it happens to be my favorite. It's what I actually really sink my teeth into. School climate, safety, feelings of belonging. Academic expectations for students. Not what they achieve, but the expectations from parents and from teachers. Subject areas, attitudes to learning mathematics. Not how they do, but their attitudes towards it. Right now, we are doing a massive evaluation in Myanmar, and attitudes towards learning through ICT is a huge component. We're looking at the attitudes, not just how they're using ICT, because for the first time, these schools are receiving ICT. Program innovations, the data use, school leadership, all of that is perception. Professional climate and professional development, all of that is perception. And perception is reality for the individual, which is why perception is so important. School-parent relationships, perception. School-community relations, perception. And we saw that in question 6. And if you think about leadership and what you do in a school or across schools, a lot of your work has to do with perception. It has to do with getting the multiple perceptions from your multiple stakeholders and bringing them into a single vision. Seeing how you can combine, how you can collaborate, right? So oftentimes this is overlooked, and part of the reason this is overlooked is because it's not very common to know how to measure these, right? We think it's kind of this nebulous, artsy kind of thing. It's not. Everything is very measurable and concretely measurable. And that's what I want to talk to you about today, especially. And so if we do the data inventory matrix, sorry about that, and we look at the types of data, what we notice really quickly is that although you can use these pieces, observations, test results, and databases and records, for most of it, when it comes to perception, surveys and interviews and focus groups is what we're generally limited to. So for those schools that are really test happy, and I call them test happy schools because they do every single test that's possibly available to increase their school self-evaluation, there's a whole piece that's extremely important that's missing. That's not me. Okay? And that's what I want to talk about. And perception is to understand how various people in the community view a particular school, program, event, whatever it is, classroom, teacher, education, curriculum. It's to understand the beliefs and assumptions that underlie actions or non-actions. When you can understand perception, you can understand why people are going to do or not do what you ask them to do as a school leader or as a group leader. So that's why it's really important to understand where this is coming from. And all of it is valid. Everybody can read that in the back? So is that 3 or 4? How many people say 3? And how many people say 4?
Yeah, so the way you look at it. From the
Are both, are either answer valid? That's the problem with perception.
See, my confusion lies in, and I'm sorry, I keep learning these wonderful practices. If everyone's got data, student data, staff data, data from parents, how they feel about the school, why do we need perception?
That's a great question. If we have data, why do we need perception? And I want to revisit that question at the end of this workshop. So remember to ask that again if I don't bring it up.
Inspectors come, they want to see. You may have predictive scores, but they want to see data of what you're actually
Yes,
and what you actually have in the school.
yes.
So I'm a little confused.
We're going to actually engage in why perception is important from a research perspective. So perception data. First, whose perception? Is it your faculty's perception, staff, leadership, students, parents, community, etc.? So the idea of public, especially for the marketing team. So what we want to look at is first the source, the loci. The second thing is the type of perception. Are we talking about people, events, or situations? And when we talk about perceptions, we're talking about attitudes, beliefs, and values. And I think this is why it's such a sensitive topic, especially in a multicultural, diverse place with oodles of curricula and accreditation bodies all coming together and a single agency trying to make some kind of standardized best practices across it. So if we think about that and we think about the role of the leadership, which is where we're coming to, this is where we want to start to make the link. So if we think of the role of leadership, and this is a slightly limited role, as creating the space for the key components of teaching and learning to happen, then not only do you need instructional leadership, professional collaboration, professional reflection, responsive instruction, and standardized outcomes, amongst others. But the role of leadership is to make all of this happen. Because sometimes leaders are not doing the instructional leadership, but they're setting the stage for others to do that, like their SMEs, etc. And that can be put in for all. So now we're going to do something fun. Your next exercise, your next activity. You have a list of responsibilities that are categorized that leaders do. Affirmation, focus, knowledge of the curriculum, visibility, cultural communication. And an enormous research study was conducted to look at how these particular things that leaders do correlate with student achievement. Okay? And what I want you to do is just put them in the order of correlation with student achievement and rank them from 1 to 10. What do you think is the most important to least important in terms of how it correlates with student achievement? Okay? Is that clear? Great. So, I was asked what is there really a right answer or not? And I won't say it's right or wrong, what I'll say is it's research-based. So what happened was a group of researchers came together and picked up a number of studies, hundreds of studies, and put them all together and walked through each one using a particular protocol. We call that a meta-analysis of the research literature to come up with the correlates that are stronger between certain leadership practices and student achievement. Because the idea being that what we do know about school effectiveness research is that the number one predictor of student achievement is prior student achievement. Right? After that comes family educational culture. And after comes school effect. Okay, so school effect is not actually the number one piece. You can tell your parents that next time. I suggest you do it delicately. But what they did is that they looked at all these components of leadership, because it's actually a leadership study, and they wanted to know, well, you know, what happens if the leader's gone? What does the leader do exactly? And sometimes as a teacher, as a student, or as a parent, you really don't know that the leader takes care of all these things. You know, you only run into your leader when there's an assembly or you're in trouble. So you want to kind of look at it from a different perspective. And so it's called the nature of school leadership. There are 21 responsibilities. And the number one correlate at 0.33. So everybody understands what a correlate is when I say that, yeah? So the perfect correlation is 1 to 1. Right? That's the highest you can get, 1. Okay, 1.0. The number one correlate at 0.33 is situational awareness. So I'm going to read that out for you. That the leader is aware of the details and undercurrents running in the school and uses this information to address current and potential problems so that they actually get the school. Flexibility. I thought you'd enjoy that. At 0.28, discipline at 0.27, outreach, monitoring, and evaluation. And then as you go down the list, you see culture, knowledge of curriculum, change it. Focus is actually down there at 0.24. And the last one, interestingly enough, is relationships. Now this doesn't mean that these are not important, but you might want to consider that if you have a good culture, you're going to have better relationships. And they're not necessarily completely independent. Does this surprise anybody?
Yes. Yes.
Yes. Tell me why. Tell me why you're surprised. You said yes with such...
Because it's like we thought it's like the focus should be the first one, because a child should know what is his goals, what he has to achieve.
Okay.
So based on that, he's going to work towards the progress.
Okay. Because focus gives you goals and targets, and then you'll work towards those. So you expect that to be
And
the tightest to student
teachers
achievement.
help them to reach the goal.
You got them all down? You wrote all the answers down? So what I want to do is pick one that is actually difficult to measure for a lot of people, or they think it's difficult to measure for a lot of schools. If you had to show evidence of your situational awareness, how would you do that? Let's brainstorm together as a group. It doesn't have to be perfect. Situational awareness. You want to prove that you've got some. Is it perception data, or is it demographic data, or student achievement data?
Yeah, we would. But this is the 9.
What have we got? What kind of data would we get? What kind of category for situational awareness? Perception. Okay? What kind of evidence for situational awareness?
I would say that it might be seen either in some of your live sort of action plans or minutes of meetings that you've had where you're capturing conversations about certain particular events or...
Okay, so you could use documentation of leadership meetings.
Conflict resolution.
Pardon?
Conflict resolution.
Some evidence from your conflict resolution. So did you see it coming, or are you already always reactional? Which might be a perception piece as well. Now remember that perception data, I mean we have the documents, but remember that perception data is mostly focus groups, interviews, and surveys. So if you're not doing those pieces, you may not be able to capture these pieces. Most of these. Now, focus groups and interviews take time, and they're important. Surveys take less time. And so I want to talk to you very specifically for the rest of this session. How much time do we have? We've got 45 minutes. Do we need a break? How many of you feel you'd like a 5-minute break? Because we are at halftime. Yeah, we're okay? Okay. We're gonna do one thing. We're just gonna move a few people around. So Sarah's gonna do that, and then we'll resume. But while she's doing that, what I suggest you do is look at this and think, what would I like to measure ideally if I had to pick 2 of these pieces to measure my leadership? So what would I like to measure out of this list? Ideally. Don't worry about how. Just ideally if you could. So what would you like to do? What would you like to measure your own leadership? Don't worry about the correlate.
Which way?
Okay. And then you've got the chart. You want to know what your situation is? What else would you like to do? To check if you have records. Yes.
Maybe
That's okay. What I said was if you would take those lists and think about what I really like to measure.
maybe it's not going to fit with the student which is so maybe
Okay, so I'm going to point to tables and just ask you what you would ideally want to measure from this list. If you didn't have any restrictions. This one. To know your own leadership.
adaptability
Situational awareness. This is the point of view of what a leader does and how much it influences student achievement.
No, same thing. how it affects the student achievement. Yeah, as you are a leader and you think about them.
Okay. So I just want
As a
to,
leader, which role you
all right,
play
everybody's
so that
speaking
it gets
situational awareness. This is the top one. I want to qualify some of this for you. First of all, school effect on student achievement, as I mentioned earlier, wasn't massive. In some studies, it's as low as 12%. In some studies, it's as big as 22%. So we're talking about a correlate within that little percentage of effect, first. Second of all, just because it's the most correlated, it might not be the easiest thing for you to work on all the time, right? So you might want to think, don't think about the correlates, think about anything that you would want to know about your school to tell you about how you're going to adjust your school improvement plan. That's what I wanted you to think through. So it could be your flexibility, but then that has to do with perhaps your policies. If it has to do with your discipline, that might be something that's easier to measure because you could look at what, if you wanted to measure the level of discipline in your school quickly without having to do any extra data collection. What could you look at? I've heard it before in the room, so I know you know. I think it was you that said incident reports.
Yes, and contribution.
Right. Any kind of disciplinary action with kids needs to be documented. So if you have a counseling system, you've got a data management system, you'd have that. Calls home for issues.
Behavior management. Behavior management.
Any kind of behavioral management data. So all of those pieces could actually feed in without you having to do additional work to measure your discipline. Right? What I'm going to do is, for the next little bit, I'm going to show you how we can measure culture. Okay? And I picked a middle one.
Can I also ask you,
Yeah.
or is it very much late?
What?
Don't we have to not just measure this, but have people taking responsibility?
Yes, as a next step.
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes, it's
By
coming up.
whom and when? Timelines?
Coming up, yes. But those are, yes. We'll get into the details of that. Okay. So culture. What is culture? We're not talking about individual culture. We're talking specifically about your school culture. Okay. So it's your norms. It's your normative practices. It's what you no longer notice. Okay? Your culture, your school culture, you don't notice. Right? So making it explicit becomes difficult. So I'll give you an example. And you can even look at your own personal cultures. You're sitting in your home as a kid, and it is completely normal for, I don't know, for every Friday, there's a norm that at 1 p.m. you all sit for dinner, or for lunch. And every Friday, rice and lamb is served. This is a norm, right? We now have a normative practice. And suddenly one Friday, for whatever reason, you as a kid goes to your friend's house. And nobody sits for lunch. And you're sitting at the table wondering what's happening. Because for you, this is normal, right? And you're wondering where the rice and lamb is, and suddenly pizza delivery arrives at 3 p.m. And it was your friend that called. You're very confused because you're trying to figure out what this means, right? What happened? Because your norm is not the same as your friend's house's norm. Now, your friend comes over, same experience, right? Those are the practices you don't even notice anymore. You don't know that there's anything special about it. That's just how you behave. Translate that into a school practice, right? It's absolutely normal for when the bell rings that all the kids dilly-dally in the hall, right? They don't go because they know that there's, going to be a hall monitor that's going to come and usher them in, and there's absolutely no measure that's punitive for them.
Or they hate the last period.
Or they don't like the last period. And everybody knows this in the school, so it's okay. Nothing happens. And then you have a friend visiting from another school who's going to a military-style school, and if his seat is not in the seat, when the bell rings, he gets attention. So he's the only person who's sitting down when the bell rings, and he's wondering, what just happened? I'm in the twilight zone, right? That's two different norms of practice. This is your school culture, right? Or if I, as a teacher, for example, am having difficulty with teaching geometry, right? I'm a science teacher, I've been put into this math lesson and I don't really feel comfortable. Can I knock on the math teacher's door and say, I really don't know what I'm doing, can you please help me? Or will I have a whole rumor across the school talking about what a bad teacher I am? That is a norm, right? Am I comfortable going somewhere to another colleague? Or do I have to hide it and try and Google everything, right? What is the norm in your school? And it's not really talked about, it just is. So that is the culture that, as a school leader, your job is to set it, change it, modify it. And how do you know? Because it's just normal, you don't really notice it anymore. That's what I want to talk to you about, how we can measure that rather quickly. Sounds like fun? That's very perceptual, yes? Okay, great. So, and this is another reason I love educational research, we can quantify almost anything. School culture. If you look at school culture, culture is the most powerful source of leverage for bringing about change in a school, and in fact, in any organization. Yes?
But that's why I think there's one in terms of leadership quality. And yet it's not.
It's situational, yes, but like I said, qualify those. This isn't, there's not 10 commandments and these are it. That's not how it works. It's not how research works. But you could take these top ones and look at them, okay? So if you think about how you want to do a systematic change, culture is an extremely powerful way of doing that, okay? Now think about what works 3 years ago as a concept. How many of you were here 3 years ago when you first heard about what works? Only a few of you. What did you think when they said that all the private schools are going to come together and start sharing their best practices? I see a big, I don't think so. But that was an honest reaction from many people, right? And Gerald can attest to this. Right? There was a lot that said the culture of Dubai's private education sector will not allow for everybody to come together and be colleagues, professional colleagues, across schools. It's competitive, it's a market, we can't afford this. And here we are 3 years later, and now it's expected. What's happening at the What Works? What's going on? I want more of this, more of this. And we've just finished a research study talking about the fact that they want more in-depth collaboration across schools now. It's been a shift in culture across Dubai's private sector in education. And that leverage will go a very long way, right? So that's what I want you to think about. And it's the leadership's position and how they bring it together. They create opportunities for cultural shifts and then push for them. School culture is the beliefs, attitudes, and behaviors which characterize a school. School culture is known to have an effect on student achievement, as we've seen, but it also has an effect on staff member satisfaction, community support, and parental engagement. So how do you measure school culture? I want you to brainstorm for a little while how you can measure school culture and come up with at least one way at each table of how you can do this. You're saying no to me. That's what happened. Think about how you
Okay, fine. You're just asking like how to think about the common measure, because like school to school the national is varies and syllabus varies.
So then you have to start thinking outside the box. Because school might not be tied. It might be, but it might not be. So what are those pieces that we might want to know about?
A common standard.
What happens across schools that are best practices? That's what works is about. What can happen? What's a good practice no matter what curriculum you're talking about? Is laundering in the hallways a good practice? Or is going into your classroom on time? No matter what curriculum you're at, going into your room on time for your teacher to deliver is a good practice, right?
Timing or observing. But here the question is how do you measure? So you need like points, criteria or
Okay, so if she looks at, so let's just look at the specific one, timing is observed.
Whatever culture you have, the child should be in school at 8 o'clock.
then comes discipline.
Okay. So then how would you, if that's a key component of your school culture, how would you measure that?
All the children are coming on time or not.
So the observation.
Observation.
With the school uniform also will matter. If it's rules, you can say that in the
All that comes under discipline. Discipline.
discipline and culture. That my school doesn't allow girls without scarves.
No, what she is telling. How do you come to know that? So we do observe the children. So that is advantage. Yeah, like how do you? For us, research. We do research. The children do research. Children generally do research and then they come up with their answers and all. And given rules, students survey. Students survey. Teachers survey. That teachers can give a survey based on their that's right. Nowadays, all the schools are doing their boys and girls. Students do the survey, they give the take the class like students get the perspective and teachers also teachers do the fill up. And then we take the survey and they come.
So that you kind of
Culture based giving an example for a survey. Actually, a survey can like if the survey she is able to get to know how it has gone good or bad. In the same way, culture can measure. A survey can measure a culture. Survey, actually survey you can find out how students are how do I find out that not maybe we can change Basically,
You're the only one smiling. Can you stop us from here? Everybody looks like you're gonna get a slider. Yeah.
That's fine, isn't it?
Yeah, that's fine. It's phantom power.
Oh, okay.
Well, yeah, I've had fun.
But I've just been, it seems to be okay, and I've like moved the levels up to 10.
So you will have my plate.
Will you have my plate?
I don't know. I forgot my plate on the other slider. So I have to tape it down. But it's static.
Yes.
Okay. Probably just get bits of everyone.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. That's what I wanted.
Can I get in? How are you doing? Running around like a headless chicken. Not really. No? I learned my lesson.
Write down all these. You're supposed to write down. How do you rate yourself? Is there any grading pattern? Average is above 90, it's outstanding. It's qualitative, not quantitative. What I am understanding. This has to be realistic. I know it's confusing. I know.
How are we doing? Are we ready to regroup? All right. What have you got? Surveys. Okay, a survey, a code of conduct. Survey for who? Teacher and student surveys. Surveys. PTA meetings?
Parent teacher association that is formed, the governing body is that's formed.
That's an activity.
Okay.
Can't have activity as a data source. Yes.
Questionnaires,
Questionnaires.
self-evaluation by students themselves.
Student questionnaires.
Parents,
Parents. Teachers.
We agree with our neighbors.
Survey. What have we got over there? Surveys? Survey. Okay, and here we had surveys at the end. So one of the reasons surveys are so exciting for schools as they start to look at perception data is, let's face it, interviews and focus groups are the alternative, and they're tedious to do. Surveys are quicker and they quantify. So that's why it's often a favorite. Now, how do we determine the current status of our school's culture? I'm going to walk you through an actual instrument that we have, okay? research-based tool to measure the health of a school's culture. Okay? And it's called the School Culture Triage Survey. It was developed in the late 90s or mid 90s, and it's been refined into the 2000s. And it's been used across the US and across Canada. It's a very quick mechanism to accurately determine the present state of any school's culture. This crosses boundaries. This crosses curricular boundaries. And I believe it crosses cultural boundaries. I have to do more research to see which other countries it's been used in, but it has been used in other countries. But in between 81 and 2006, over 3,000 schools used this school culture triage survey with their school assessment data to see that there was a correlate. The higher the score, the higher the student achievement. Okay? So we actually have a lot of evidence that this works, this particular tool. And you're going to walk away with it, I promise. But it's just one example of how you can do this. That's all I'm doing. I'm offering a data alternative for you. So, how to measure school culture, right? This is just one alternative. It's a simple survey, and it evaluates 3 main components. So as I went around from table to table, one of the things that I noticed was people were picking on different pieces of school culture, right? And so what this does is it really just looks at 3 categories quickly. And that's why it's called a triage. Does everybody know what a triage is?
No.
Triage? No, but that's yeah, if it was a triage, yeah. So when you go into, inshallah this doesn't happen to anybody, but if you have to go to the emergency room, the first room that you go into is what? After you hit the lobby, and then right away they take you into this unit with a nurse. She's the triage nurse. And she checks you out to see how bad the damage is. So I'll give you an example. I fell a couple of months ago on my face, and I hit my nose on the ground. And so it's funny now. It wasn't funny at the time. So I walked in, and they took me to triage. She immediately checked my blood pressure and my pupils, check if I had fallen on my head. And that didn't happen this time. And so I was fine in that case. So I didn't have a concussion. Then she needed to check if I needed, if my nose was broken, which is much more serious if I just had a cut, which is less serious. So she checks the depth. So she's just doing triage. And based on that, she's going to decide, am I a serious candidate? Do I need immediate attention from the surgeon? Or can I be put in a lineup? And the lineup will be based on the other people's triage at that moment, right? How serious and how great is the danger I'm in? Okay, so turns out it's just a cut, and I'm not in great danger, and they're just going to do a couple of stitches, right? If somebody comes in to a hospital and they've got heart pains and they're older and they've had a history of cardiac issues, that's going to shoot them up to the top of the list immediately, right? And so the triage nurse decides immediately, you need a doctor right now for this issue. Okay, that's what triage is. Does that make sense? Yeah. So this is a cultural triage survey of your school. So from it, we're going to be able to see what do we immediately need to know, or it's okay, it's not a priority. And to do that, there are 3 categories: professional collaboration, affiliative collegiality, and self-determination and efficacy. Really fancy words. What do they mean? Okay? Professional collaboration is, do teachers or members of your staff feel comfortable talking to one another to solve professional issues? So remember the example that I gave you before. If I'm going to teach geometry and I'm not comfortable, can I knock on the math teacher's door and say, I really feel uncomfortable, I need your help? If she says yes, then we've got a great professional collaboration culture. If I'm too scared to even do that, we don't have the greatest one, right? Affiliative and collegial relationship. Do people enjoy working together, support one another, and feel valued and included? Right? Some schools have more authoritarian, exclusive practices. Some people have more inclusive practices. And efficacy or self-determination. Are people in the school because they want to be or because they have to be? Is it a default position? Do they work to improve their skills as professionals? Or are they just helpless victims of a large, uncaring bureaucracy? right? Do I just do things because I have to, and it doesn't matter what I say, right? These are the kind of the points of consideration. So what I want you to do now is I want you to individually think of your schools. And I want you to think of that one person in your faculty who's a problem for you. I want you to think about, and don't say who it is.
Only one person.
Only one. The most problematic person in your school. The one who you know, even if they don't say it, are not happy with the things that are happening in your school. The one who doesn't like the norms of your school. Okay? Do you have that person in your head? I thought it would take a little longer. Okay. Keep that person in your head. I want you to enter their headspace. Okay? And I want you to now turn to the next page of your handout. And I want you to fill in the survey that's there, and you'll recognize it, from the perspective of your most problematic faculty member, the one who is most unhappy with the norms of your school. And fill it out from their point of view, not from yours. Okay? And you're not sharing this with anybody. This is anonymous and confidential. You're not even sharing it with me.
I can count one cup otherwise it's fine.
Yeah, with that person.
So everybody will write name.
Mostly he will be really good.
I do not be there. Or you didn't identify. We do not have. Don't have. Ready. We also. Mathematics not necessarily. Really?
He doesn't like it. I don't know. Maybe he does everything you say, but he tells you. If he's influential, they're not all influential. They don't all. It's a school piece. It's not a.
Maybe another member, which is unhappy.
One and two. Yeah. Really? But it's like from different points they can vary in either in one or in two. That's it. But we can't talk about that person. That's why I said I'm not
because there is
clear.
mostly no relationship between. How can I?
Yeah, other department. We don't know what
Side department.
My department will. We always work
Within the
together.
department, this all happens in a good manner.
We always
Mostly, most department, most social media is the most.
Everybody has to
No, because we are and the least meeting.
I think you can.
Yeah, cool. Yeah. This problem is
other construction is not, and they are progressing.
This meeting is more work without talking. 1 plus 1 is you initiate a short meeting.
But yes, absolutely. That's why I said we've all finished our survey from a certain perspective. Some of you, one person said to me, this is actually very painful because I'm judging myself when I'm doing this. And I think one of the things that I want to present to you, as a professional evaluator who does this across several continents, save the judgment for later, right? Because what it does is it helps you to beat yourself up with no particular good outcome, right? So reserve judgment for later. And the other thing I want to say is evaluation is oftentimes negative. That's how it's seen. That's the perception of it. And I work very hard with my colleagues to change that perception and help people realize that if you don't enter into the zone of understanding what is negative, what is not working, if you don't enter into conflict, you actually don't progress, right? And so, yes, it can be painful, but it's necessary. And one of the ways to reduce that pain is to reserve judgment for later, right? If you want to judge yourself after you've initiated something to resolve the issue. Because that's a good time to judge yourself, right? Because you've made an effort. Rather than judging yourself for the problems that are. Okay? Because as you're doing that, you're detracting from your energy to actually resolve the problem. And don't forget, especially as a school leader, and I think this is harder for leadership than most people consciously admit, that actually can be seen. You want to be positive, right? If you're judging yourself, then imagine how those teachers are feeling, right? You want to make it okay that there's something wrong. Let's fix it. It's not just assign blame. That's I'm often saying this in meetings. I really don't care who's to blame. Let's fix this, right? Then maybe I'll go back and address it if it's a critical issue. If it's not and everybody's learned, great, right? So I just wanted to address that because I really do think that judgment can hinder good evaluation. Okay, so now that you've done this, okay, from the perspective of your most problematic faculty member, and this is the problem with workshops with educators, is all of you cheat. You all knew what this is going for, so some of you picked up the papers that you already had and started comparing, okay? And so we're going to do that, but we're going to do it in a structured way. And so I want to just talk about the administration of the triage survey if you're going to use this. It must be completely individual and anonymous. That's super important. So oftentimes when you have a faculty meeting, you'll do it then, okay? It's at the start of the faculty meeting and it's done without much explanation. Just, we're going to use this for improvement purposes. Can you please fill it out anonymously, no names. If you saw, there was absolutely no room for a name in there. And then we're going to collect them, okay? So that's how it's typically done. You take the survey, you complete it at the start from the perspective about your school. You calculate the total. So you saw there were numbers. Then you calculate the survey and you work off from the perspective of a problematic faculty. So you've got 2 here. This is where we're at right now, right? So I want you to calculate yours from the beginning and then the one that you just did from the problematic. And you should have 2, well maybe you don't, maybe you are problematic or you're not happy with the noise. But you should have 2 numbers. So if you could do that tabulation now, that'd be great. Calculate the total and then compare the 2 values.
But we didn't do this when there was no point in hiding and hiding.
most he would put maximum meaning 2 papers could find the
This is the paperwork.
So I decided
It's there in the book.
5 to 10
Everything is
the next year when I have to work for a serious consideration by my and I was going to feed back into
lunchtime.
Now we can't attend any because we have
We stayed here for now after the break. After lunch.
and now it's like the last time. And after that only this session.
and that's okay. So if you show them that you're going to react right away with information. And include, we'll talk about inclusion on Monday. So how are we doing? Are we all tabulated up? Yes. What's the difference? We're still tabulating. And she's already seen these numbers. No, there's no right or wrong answer. I was just asked if it's too generous. So, what was the purpose of comparing the two values?
Find the difference between good and bad.
Find the difference between your perception from your point of view and this imaginary person's perception.
Critical view. Critical view.
It's a critical view. It gives you the spread that might exist in your school. To be able to self-evaluate. So when we score, yeah.
Is it good that the scores are more, or is it better that they are smaller?
Is it good that the scores are closer, or is it better that they're far apart? So the way, I'm going to walk through this. It's a very important question. In general, we don't look at individual scores and compare them. This is an exercise for you as a leader to understand what this can do. Okay? In general, we're going to take a school average. Okay? And the reason we do that is we want to know overall how your school is feeling, how your faculty is feeling, right? What they think of the school culture is the school culture, because their perception is reality. And not every perception is going to be exactly the same. And I'll tell you something else, if you do this on day 1 when somebody's had a really bad day versus day 2 when they've had a better day, those numbers can shift. Okay? So I think, I've got 15 minutes left. Okay, so that's perfect timing. Pardon? It's time now? Oh, you're kidding. Oh, I'm so very sorry. Can I have 5 more minutes?
Yes, yes.
I thought it was at 12:30, so I timed it for that. My apologies. I'll be quick. If you go 16 to 40, if you get a score between 17 and 40, your school is in need of critical attention. Immediate attention is necessary. That is the red zone. Okay? You need to conduct a full-scale assessment of your school's culture. If you're between 41 and 59, modifications and improvements are necessary. Begin with a more intense assessment of your school's culture to determine which area is necessary.
What is the average between two scores?
The average across all of your faculty. Yeah. 60 to 75, monitor and maintain making positive adjustments. If you're above 75, you are amazing. Sorry, yeah, 76. How many people got 75 or more? In the history of all of the research that has been done with this survey, no one has ever gotten 75. So what I suggest, what I would offer to you is, no, not as an individual, but as a school. What I offer to you and submit to you is use this triage survey in your school. Go back and use it. You have all the questions. You know how to use it. You know what to do. So I submit that you do this. And then how you can do this is very easy. You distribute the surveys to teachers and administration. You make sure they do not put their names on it. Teachers collect and tabulate responses. You share results at faculty meetings. And that's very important, the teachers. So somebody asked me earlier, how do you make sure that your teachers get involved? This is a really easy way. Get a group of teachers to do this. Then you share the results at the faculty meeting. That's a really important piece. They need to know that you actually did something with the survey. Select the item for improvement, select a task force for an action plan, and then in a little while, when it's appropriate, 4 to 5 months down the road, maybe the next quarter, you want to administer it again. Okay? This is a quick assessment of the current status that can assist you in determining how you want to allocate your time. Maybe your culture is great and you don't need to deal with it. Maybe there's an issue that you need to deal with. Okay? So before engaging in an elaborate, extensive research piece, figure out very quickly where it's at. I'll skip through this. And then if you do use this, I invite you to email me and tell me about it. Okay? Because believe it or not, I just think this stuff is fun and informative. Okay? So if you do have other questions for me, I'm still here. And Sarah, as you can see, walks around as my RA, my research assistant. And if you need to contact me, this is the best way to get to me. So I apologize for the timing. I really did think I had 10 more minutes. I'm here for questions, though, for individuals. Thank you.